In section 6.3, we're going to continue factoring. This time, all of the leading coefficients will be some number other than 1. So the process is a little bit more complex than what we did in the last section, but it's essentially the same. Some of the problems we're going to factor by grouping, and others I'm going to show you a quicker way to factor, which involves the same process as factoring by grouping. It's not quite trial and error, but it will save you some time. If it's not a process that you're happy with, that you feel comfortable with, factor by grouping, because that will work every time. It's just a little bit longer of a process. Remember when we had something that looked like x squared plus 5x plus 6, we said we were looking for factors of 6 that will add up to 5. Well, what we were really doing was we were multiplying this 1 and this 6 together to get that number. It just looked like we were picking the constant number, but we were really multiplying the coefficient of the highest power term and the constant. So that's how we're going to start off these problems. We are going to look at factors of 6 times 6, which will give us 36, that will add up to our middle term. And what we want to do is find two numbers that multiply together to give us 36 that will add together to give us 13, and those numbers would be 9 and 4. 9 times 4 is 36. 9 plus 13 is 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this polynomial as 6x squared plus 9x plus 4x plus 6. There's nothing different between the first row and the second row, 6x squared plus 13x plus 6, and 6x squared plus 9x plus 4x plus 6. They still add up to the same thing. I've just written them as not combining like terms. So if we were multiplying two binomials out, we would get this step, and then we would go to that step. So this is kind of a reverse FOIL method. We're doing the steps of multiplication backwards. So what we're going to do is we're going to just look at the first two terms. And we're going to say, what do they have in common? They have a 3 and an x in common. So I'll factor out a 3x, and that leaves me with 2x plus 3. Now I'm going to look at the second group. What does the positive 4x and the 6 have in common? They have a positive, so I should actually have that plus in black. They have a positive 2 in common that they can factor out. And we will have left 2x plus 3. And now we're back to something that we saw in class the other day. So we see that the 2x plus 3, the parenthesis, is what the two terms have in common. So if I pull out the 2x plus 3, what do I have left? I have the 3x plus 2. So if we have 2x plus 3 times 3x plus 2 as our factors, we can check to make sure that it does equal 6x squared plus 13x. I can look at the first two terms, 2x times 3x, that gave me the 6x squared. My insides and my outsides give me 9x plus 4x, which is what I would have right here. 9x plus 4x, that gave me the 13x, and 3 times 2 as my last terms give me the 6, so I know that I factored it correctly. For number 2, I have 3x squared minus 4x minus 15. And so I am going to look for factors of 3 times negative 15, which gives me negative 45, that will add up to negative 4. In this case, I want to I'm gonna do a slightly different method, but it all starts out the same way. It depends on what two numbers I get right here. And I know that 5 times 9 is 45, and if I have a negative 9 and a positive 5, I could multiply that together to give me a negative 45, and add them together to give me a negative 4. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be sneaky here, and I'm going to say, okay, what if I take one of those? So let's say 3x squared minus, and I'm going to write that 9 as 9x, because I know if I were to write it over here in this form, I would say 3x squared minus 9x plus 5x minus 15, right? And so I'm just going to put that 9x right there. But I'm not going to do this time. That would be if we were factoring by grouping. I'm going to say, what do these two terms have in common? And I'm going to factor out a 3x. And what do I have left? I have an x minus 3. Well, what I have left is one of my factors of this. So I'm going to come and erase this, and I'm going to say, I know one of my factors is x minus 3. And now I have to figure out what my other factor will be. Well, I know that when I multiply my firsts together, I've got to get 3x squared. So what do I have to multiply x by to get that 3x squared? What's going to go in the first spot? If I want a 3x squared, I've got to put a 3x right in there, right? And what do I have to put in the last spot to get a negative 15? If I have a negative 3 times what will give me negative 15? It's got to be a positive 5. So let me see, if I multiplied that out and checked it, is that the right answer? X minus 3 times 3x plus 5. 3x squared, x times 5 is 5, positive 5x. Negative 3 times 3x will be minus 9x squared. Negative 3 times 5 will be negative 15. I'm sorry, where did I get that? Negative 3 times 3x is 9x. So I have 3x squared minus 4x minus 15. Sure enough, it does factor. So if we can figure out one of the factors, we can figure out the second factor where we're not just guessing haphazardly. We are systematically figuring it out over here and then going backwards to figure out what that second factor is. Okay, so let's try some more. In number 3, let's go ahead and we're going to do the odd ones by grouping, the even ones by the other method. So you need to do half. The method that you like the best, you're either going to do all the odds on this paper or all the evens. And if you want more practice, you can go back and do the other problems that you're not doing on the video, the method that you want to do them, and that way it gives you more practice. Okay, so I know that I have to multiply 5 times negative 18. That gives me negative 90. And I need the numbers to add up to a positive 1. So those numbers would be a positive 10 and a negative 9. So what I will do is I'm going to write 5x squared plus x minus 18 as 5x squared minus 9x plus 10x minus 18. And I put the minus 9x first so that right here I will have a plus sign in the middle of the two groups that I'm going to have. Makes less of a chance I'll make a mistake. If I group the first two together, 5x squared minus 9x, what do they have in common? They have an x in common. So I'm going to factor that out, and I'm going to be left with 5x minus 9. If I look at the second group, and I have 10x minus 18, so what do they have in common? They have a 2 in common. And they will be left with 5x minus 9. Since the parentheses are exactly the same, I have x times that parenthesis plus 2 times that parenthesis. I can factor the parenthesis out, 5x minus 9, and I am left with x plus 2. So that's my final answer. In problem 4, we're looking for factors of 6 that will add up to 2, because remember we have to multiply 6 times 1 to get our 6 here. And so when I look at factors of 6, I know they all have to be the same sign. And the only way to get factors of 6 is this way, 6 times 1 or 2 times 3. Or negative 6 times negative 1 and negative 2 times negative 3. But when I look at these numbers, none of them will add up to 2. 6 plus 1 is 7, so negative 6 plus negative 1 is 7. 2 plus 3 is 5. I'm sorry, negative 6 plus negative 1 is negative 7. And negative 2 plus negative 3 is negative 5. So when this happens, we know that this is a prime polynomial. It cannot be factored. In problem number 5, if I multiply the 7 times the 2 together, I get 14. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply together to give me 14, but add together to give me 15. And those are the easy ones, 14 times 1. So I will rewrite this polynomial as 7x squared plus 14x plus 1x plus 2. And now I'll group the first two together and I'll group the second two together. And I ask myself, what does 7x squared plus 14x have in common? They have a 7x in common. That gives me x plus 2. And what does x plus 2 have in common? They have a 1 in common. So if I factor, if I look at what the two terms have in common, they have the parenthesis in common. So I'll factor out the x plus 2, and I'm left with 7x plus 1 left. In problem 3, remember we want to multiply 3 times negative 2 together to get our number up here, negative 6. And we want factors of negative 6 that add up to negative 5, and we looked at that last time. We know that negative 6 and a positive 1 multiply together to give you a negative 6, and they add together to give you a negative 5. So over here on my scratch paper, I am going to take 3x squared, and I'm going to write down next to it minus 6x. I could have done plus 1x, and that would have been fine. And what am I going to factor out? I can factor out a 3x, and what am I left with? I'm left with x minus 2. So this x minus 2 is one of my factors. So I'm going to write x minus 2, and then I have my other factor, and I have to figure out what goes in there. So if I need to get 3x squared, when I multiply my firsts together, I know I'm going to multiply by an x, so what I have to have is 3x. And I want to get a negative 2 as my last term. I have a negative 2 here. I have to multiply it by something, so that's got to be multiplied by a positive 1. And now to check, I do my insides. That gives me a negative 6x, and my outsides give me a positive 5x, and they add up to, or I'm sorry, a positive 1x, and they add up to negative 5x. So I know that I multiplied it correctly. So my answer is just x minus 2 times 3x plus 1. In number 7, we are looking for, when we multiply the leading coefficient times the constant, we're looking at factors of 3 that will add up to 4. Factors of 3 that will add up to 4 would be 3 times 1. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. So I can rewrite this polynomial as 3x squared plus 3x plus 1x plus 1. Now I look at 3x squared plus 3x, and I know that I can factor a 3x out of there. And what's left? X plus 1. Then I look at x plus 1, and the only thing they have in common is a 1, so I will factor a 1 out of there, and I'm left with x plus 1. Now that the parentheses are what the two terms have in common, I can pull those out to the front, and I'm left with x plus 1 times 3x plus 1. And I can check that by multiplying it out to make sure that I factored it correctly. In problem 8, when I multiply negative 4 times positive 4 times negative 15, I get negative 60. So I'm looking for two numbers that will multiply together to give me a negative 60, but add to a positive 4. Well, how about 10 and negative 6? Now I'm going to come over here on my scratch work, and I'm going to say 4x squared, and this time I'm going to use this minus 6. So I'll write that as minus 6x, because we've always used the number over here, but it doesn't matter which one you use. And let's factor out what they have in common. They have a 4x in common. If they have a 4x in common, what will be left? They'll have a 2x. Oh, they don't have a 4x in common, they have a 2x in common. So let me fix that. So if I factor out a 2x, they will have 2x minus 3 in common. So you have to factor this correctly to get this correct term, 2x minus 3. So if I come over here and I know that one of my factors is 2x minus 3, then I can figure out what the next one has to be. So I'm trying to get in my first term, when I multiply 2x times the first here, I need to get a 4x squared. Well, that tells me that I need to just multiply that by 2x. 2x times 2x gives me 4x squared. And then if I want to get negative 15 with my last term, I have to multiply negative 3 times something to give me negative 15. That's going to give me a positive 5. So if I check this to make sure that it's correct, now I just have to check the inside and the outside terms to make sure that they add up to 4x. Here I would have negative 6x, and here I would have positive 10x. And they do add up to the 4x in the middle term that I wanted, or that I started with. So I know that I factored it correctly. In problem number 9, I'm going to look at this, and I'm looking at these numbers thinking these are pretty big, but I also realize that they each have a common factor. I can factor out a 3, and so I would get 6x squared minus 7x minus 3. So factor out your greatest common factor first, because now we are trying to factor this polynomial, 6x squared minus 7x minus 3. And I know that 6 times 3 is negative 18, and I'm looking for factors that will add up to negative 7. So 18 is, I think of 9 times 2. So negative 9 times a positive 2 would give me a negative 18, but it would also add up to negative 7. So if I come back to my polynomial, my 3 is still out in the front. You can't lose that 3. But I'm going to rewrite 6x squared minus 7x as minus 9x plus 2x, then minus 3. And now I'm going to group the first two together. So I'm going to have a couple of sets of parentheses, because when I group the first two together and I say, what can I factor out? I look at 6x squared minus 9x, and I can factor out a 3x. And I usually do that in red, huh? So let's factor out this 3x. And then I'll have left a 2x minus 3. And then I'm still adding right here. That addition sign still comes down, and I'm grouping the second two together. And I say the only thing that they have in common is a 1. So I'm going to be left with 2x minus 3. So I still have the 3 and out here in the front, and I'm looking in here, and I say, okay, what they have in common is the 2x plus 3. So I will pull that out to the front, and what is left is the 3x plus 1. Once everything is being multiplied, the 3 is being multiplied by the factor 2x minus 3 and by the factor 2x or 3x plus 1. I don't need that extra set of parentheses anymore, so I can drop those if I want. And I'm left with this as my final answer. Okay, for number 10, we are looking for factors of 12 that will add up to 7. Factors of 12 that add up to 7, I know are 3 and 4. So I come over here and I take 6x squared, and let's do plus 3x. And what can I factor out of 6x squared plus 3x? I can factor a 3x out of there, and I'm left with 2x plus 1. This is one of my terms. So I come over here and I say, okay, 2x plus 1 is one of the factors, not terms, sorry. And I got to figure out what goes in my first spot. Well, if I need to get a 6x squared, what do I have to multiply 2x by? I have to multiply by a 3x. And in my last, I have a 2 in my last spot, so I have to multiply the lasts together to get a 2. I have a plus positive 1 times a positive 2 will give me that. So my answer is 2x plus 1 times 3x plus 2. And if I check it, I get my middle terms, my inside terms give me a 3x, my outside terms give me a 4x. That adds up to 7x to my middle term. In problem number 11, we know that if we multiply the leading coefficient times the constant, we're going to get negative 24. So we're looking for factors of negative 24 that will add up to a positive 10. Negative 12 times a positive 2 will give us negative 24. And negative 12 plus 2 will give us 10. So I will rewrite this as 8x squared minus 12x plus 2x minus 3. Now if I want to group the first two together and the second two together, I look at the first two and I say they have a 4x in common, and that is leaves us with a 2x plus 3. 2x minus 3. And the next group, they have nothing but a 1 in common, and that leaves us with a 2x minus 3 also. Now that the 2x minus 3's, the parentheses are the same, I can factor out the common factor, which is 2x minus 3, and I'm left with 4x plus 1. When I look at number 12, I have 15x squared minus 19x plus 6. So I know that I multiply 15 and positive 6 together. That gives me a positive 90. I'm looking for numbers that add up to negative 19. The hardest part is always going to be finding these numbers. So we get negative 10 and negative 9 will work. They will add up to negative 19 and also multiply to 90. So I come over here in my scratch work and I look at 15x squared minus 10x. And if I look to see what they have in common, I can factor out at least a 5x. And what do I have left? I have 3x minus 2. So the 3x minus 2 is going to be one of my factors. 3x minus 2. What will the other factor be? Well, I've got to get 15x squared by multiplying 3x times something. That's going to be 5x. Now I've got to get 6 by multiplying negative 2 times something. I need a positive 6. So that's got to be a negative 3. And now let's check our insides and our outsides. Negative 10x and negative 9x does give me negative 19x. So I know that I factored it right. For number 13, we're looking at factoring 6x squared minus 41x minus 7. We're looking for factors of negative 42 because 6 times negative 7 gives us negative 42. And they add up to negative 41. So I want one to be positive and one to be negative. So let's do negative 42 and a positive 1. So we're going to rewrite 6x squared minus 42x minus 41x as minus 42x minus x minus 7. Now I'm going to group the first two together. So 6x squared minus 42x, that's going to factor out a 6x, and I'm left with x minus 7. And now, oh, this should have been a plus. Negative 42x plus x. Okay, so now I look at the second group, and the only thing that they have in common is a 1. So I'll factor out the 1. And now I'm looking at what the two terms have in common. And the two terms have in common a parenthesis that I will factor out, and I'm left with 6x plus 1. When I look at 9x squared plus 18x plus 7, I know that I'm looking for factors of positive 72. 9 times 8 is 72, and they have to add up to 18. So if I start listing all the factors to figure out what different factors of 72 will add up to, I find that 12 times 6 will multiply together to give me a positive 72, and they will add together to give me a positive 18. So I'm going to come over here on my scratch work, and I'm going to write down 9x squared, and then I'm going to take one of them, it doesn't matter, plus 12x. And I'm going to factor that. When I factor that, I can factor out at least a 3x. Let's see what we have left. When I factor out the 3x, I have a 3x plus 4 left. So I know that one of my factors is 3x plus 4. Now I just have to figure out what my other factors are. Well, I know in my first I need to get a 9x squared. 3x times 3x gives me a 9x squared. I need to get an 8 in my last term. 4 times 2 will give me an 8. And if I check, my insides give me 12x, my outsides give me 6x, and that gives me 18. Your insides and your outsides always give you these numbers right here that you found. Okay, so that was not so bad, huh? In 15, we want to multiply 3 times negative 5 together. That gives us negative 15. So we're looking for factors that will add up to negative, or that will multiply together to give me negative 15, but add to give me 2. And I know that I can look at positive 5 and a negative 3. That will give me a positive 2 when I add them up. So I'm going to rewrite this now as 3x squared minus 3x plus 5x, and I did the negative first on purpose, minus 5. I can look at the first two, and I know that I have a 3x in common, so I can factor that out to x minus 1. I can look at the second two and know that I have a 5 in common. I can factor that out to x minus 1. Now the x minus 1s are the factors that I have in common. So I can factor that out, and I'm left with 3x plus 5. In problem number 16, we have a polynomial of two variables that can be factored. 4x squared plus 2xy minus 6y squared. We're going to set up our numbers here, and we're going to disregard the variables at first, just like we always do. So 4 times negative 6 is negative 24, and our middle coefficient is 2. So we're looking for factors of negative 24 that will add up to a positive 2. So those numbers would be 6 and negative 4. So I'm going to look at, now I'm going to take my 4x squared, and let's do the minus 4. But this time the middle term is xy. So I'm going to put the xy there. And now if I factor out what they have in common, they have a 4x in common. So what's left? I have an x minus y. So that tells me that one of my factors is x minus y. So I go through the exact same process. In my first term, I have to get a 4x squared. So I need to multiply x times something to give me 4x squared. That's just going to be a 4x. In my last term, I need to get a negative 6y. So I need to multiply negative y times something to give me negative 6y squared. I'm sorry, you needed a negative 6y squared. So I know it's going to be a positive 6y. Negative y times 6y gives me negative 6y. And now I check my insides and my outsides. I get 4xy on the insides, negative 6xy on the outsides, which were those numbers, and they add up to 2xy. So I know that I factored it correctly. So don't worry about the fact that there's a y in here also. You factor it the exact same way. In number 17, we have 6x squared minus 7xy minus 3y squared. This time we have a polynomial in two variables, and we're going to factor it exactly the same way. We're just going to have a y in there also. So we multiply the 6 times negative 3 to give us negative 18. We're looking for factors of negative 18 that will give us negative 7. That would be negative 9 and a positive 2. Well, this time when I'm writing my polynomial, I write 6x squared, and then instead of writing negative 7xy, I'm going to write minus 9xy plus 2xy minus 3y squared, because the like terms have variables of xy. But the process is exactly the same. I'm going to now look at the first two and factor out what they have in common. They have a 3x in common, so that gives me a 2x minus 3y. And my second group has just a y in common, so I'll factor out the y, and that leaves me with a 2x minus 3y. But now I have a parenthesis of 2x minus 3y that each term has in common. So I pull that out to the front, and I am left with 3x plus y. So the process of factoring polynomials in two variables is completely the same as factoring them in just one variable. You just have that extra y in there that you have to account for. In number 18, we take 4x squared plus 4xy minus 3y squared. And we are going to factor this. We're looking for factors of negative 12 that we get by multiplying 4 times negative 3. And we want those to add up to a positive 4. So that would be negative 2 and a positive 6. Negative 2, positive 6. And I come over here to the side and I take my 4x squared, and I notice that my middle term is 4xy, so I'm going to take minus 2xy. And I look to see what they have in common. They have a 2x in common. That will leave me with 2x minus y. So 2x minus y is one of my factors. What is my other factor? 2x times what gives me 4x squared? That'll be 2x. Negative y times what gives me negative 3y squared? That'll be a positive 3y. And now I'm done factoring that. Let's check to make sure that we did it correctly. What do I get for my insides? I get negative 2xy, the number right there. And my outsides, I get a positive 6xy, the number right there. But that does add up to 4xy. In problem 19, I want to look at this and realize that I can factor out a 3. Get your greatest common factor factored out first so that we only factor out, or we're only factoring a trinomial that has smaller numbers in it. So we'll have x squared plus 5x plus 3 is what we're really trying to factor. Now remember, the 3 always stays out in front. But this time, I have a leading coefficient of 1. So when I'm looking for my numbers, 1 times 3 is 3, and they add up to 5. Are there any numbers that can multiply together to give you a 3, but add up to a 5? No, because the only way we can get 3 is 3 times 1, or negative 3 times negative 1. And those add up to either 4 or negative 4. So we are actually done right here. This is our final answer. We don't say that it's prime because we were able to factor out a greatest common factor. But the trinomial won't factor after that. In problem number 20, if we multiply 2 times negative 2, we'll get negative 4. So we are looking for factors of negative 4 that will add up to a positive 5. Well, negative 4 and a positive 1, positive 4 and negative 1, or negative 2 and a positive 2 are the only way that we can do this, to factor two numbers to get negative 4. But when we add these up, we're going to get a negative 3. When we add these up, we'll get a positive 3. And when we add those up, we get a 0. So when we cannot come up with numbers here that give us what we're looking for, we know that this is a prime polynomial, and it can't be factored any further.